Hello everyone, David here with another review of the latest episode of Gotham entitled The Blind Fortune Teller. And man, oh man, this is it. This is the episode that everyone's going to be talking about this entire season of Gotham. I mean, forget all the other episodes. This is the one that's going to capture everyone's attention, and for various reasons. Some people are going to hate this particular aspect of this episode that everyone's going to be talking about. Nobody's going to really remember all the other stuff that I'm actually going to have to talk about because it is a in-depth review of the episode, and I need to talk about those other things. Even though it's going to be briefly, I need to tackle them before I get to the big thing here that everyone's going to be raving about. But people are either going to hate it because it involves something that practically had no origin to begin with, so when they start tackling the origin, I was going to be like, no, my god, no, what are they doing? They're tearing this thing apart. You're tearing me apart, Gotham! Or people are going to be okay with it because they're doing their own thing, the person involved did a great job, and they're going to be cool with it and go about their lives like any other day. But before I tackle that, I need to talk about the other stuff that happened in this episode, which, truth be told, wasn't as eventful. But there are some bullet points in there that I think I need to at least hit before I tackle the big thing here. First of all, the episode does the same thing that last week's episode did, which is to have about 5 different stories, or 4 maybe, going about in different directions and cutting from one to another. However, I do admit that the editing felt just a little tighter this time around, mainly because the stories didn't cut back and forth too much. Like, we focused more on the case that Gordon and Lee Thompkins were investigating, more so than what was going on in the background with characters like Fish Mooney and the Penguin and even Bruce Wayne. In this episode, Fish Mooney, continuing her reign of power that she acquired oh so quickly in last week's episode, she decides to retaliate against the people that are holding her and all the other people captive in this underground basement of some kind. And she works out a deal with the person that comes down saying, hey, I want to see you higher up, otherwise we are going to kill the people that you need alive, because obviously you're harvesting them for, like she puts it, spare parts, which is what I assumed at the end of last week's episode, and therefore she mentioned that in this one. And that whole thing about killing off one of their own so that the other people wouldn't have them and therefore would surrender to their terms, I'll admit, was actually somewhat clever. It's moments like that where I'm like, okay, Fish Mooney, I kind of do like somewhat how your mind works. I appreciate how your mind works as a villain, and I'm like, okay, cool, that's actually kind of neat. That's actually somewhat a little bit fascinating. What took me out of this little particular deal and what made it even less credible was that these people are working with these guys to strike a deal, and yet the other guys have guns. Did you guys not see that? They have guns, they have machine guns, they have rifles. What's stopping them from going, yeah, you think you're in charge? Here, poosh! Okay, no, nothing to see here, go back to whatever the hell you were doing, and the whole thing dissolves. I mean, if they didn't have guns or anything, then yes, I could have easily bought it. But the fact that they're surrendering to this lady who just has a bunch of men in front of her, and yet these other guys have rifles, they have guns, they have firepower to just take these guys out. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to be I'm rooting for the wrong people here, but it just doesn't make any sense. I don't have a picture, but Penguin is running his club and his numbers are dwindling, so then Victor Zsasz comes in and says, hey, you need a little bit of help. So I brought along Butch, who I worked on in my basement for a few days, and apparently he looks brainwashed, and I'm assuming he got brainwashed in the means of torture, because I know that's how Zsasz works. And I'm like, okay, I guess that'll be kind of interesting for the next episode, but for now, it almost does nothing to really move things along for Penguin's story. Bruce decides to go to Wayne Enterprises and actually confront the people, the members of the board, in terms of all that suspicious activity that's going on with some of the projects that Wayne Enterprises are being, like, the head of. And again, it's one of those things where this could have been an interesting subplot if Bruce was not a freaking kid. Him going to this board in his little suit and talking to these people like he was an adult, it just doesn't work for me. It just doesn't. This would make an awful lot more sense if he was at least, you know, around 16 or 17 years old. He's about to graduate high school, and he has a much more developed mind, but he's a kid. He's supposed to be doing kid stuff. It's the same problem I have with him trying to do detective work about the murder of his parents. Alright, the only thing that I find somewhat interesting within the subplot is the fact that there's the possibility that maybe somebody within that board or within this very building might be the culprit that even though they didn't commit the murder themselves, they might be the person behind the entire plot to assassinate the Waynes. And the worst of them all, this bitch is back. I'm sorry. But Barbara Gordon returns in this episode with almost no redeeming qualities whatsoever. She stumbles upon the apartment. She's clearly drunk. I mean, clearly drunk and in some kind of drugs. And she stumbles upon Ivy and Selena, and she's just like, whatever's about it, because obviously no fucks are being given by her. And then in the next scene, she's trying on different outfits, and apparently she's dressing up like that so that she can win Gordon back. Like, really? What goes on in your head? What do you want? Alright? This is the shit that us guys complain about women doing. And yet you are portraying it in a TV show, which we know, in fact, that's not always the case. And that's clearly portrayed by the complete opposite of this character, Lee Thompkins, who I really like in this show. It's probably the best female character we've had in this show so far, and Barbara is just the complete opposite. So now she comes back, she says, in a way, without verbally saying it, I want Gordon back, so I'm trying on these different outfits, and she's consulting Selena and Ivy about it, and then finally at the end of the episode, she goes to the precinct, and as cliched as it was, and trust me, it was a cliche, I loved her stumbling upon Gordon and Lee, who were kissing, and I'm like, yeah, there you go, there's your comeuppance, for just being just an unlikable, I hope her entire involvement with the show kind of wraps up at the end of the season, because so far I think it's just a little too late to redeem this character whatsoever. What is this, episode 16? Barbara's kind of damaged goods now. I mean, there's almost no point of her character. And based on some of the images that I've seen from next week's, from the preview for next week's episode, she's going to be coming back. And while I'm speaking about Gordon and Lee Thompkins, again, I'm really enjoying the dynamic between the two. They have way more chemistry than Gordon had with Barbara, and I'm hoping she sticks around, but I'm a little scared that I think they're going to do away with Lee, whether it be her leaving town or possibly even dying, and then Barbara's going to come back into the mix because they're going to try to keep that Barbara Gordon name because it's very essential to the comics, and I don't want to upset fans, even though some fans are already upset with another particular character that I'm about to talk about. But I really enjoyed the way they work with one another, being that they both work well with each other, both romantically and also in their jobs, because now she's the ME and she's very good at her job. And seeing the two of them investigate the case of who killed that woman, the snake dancer in the circus, was a really cool, interesting way to take things. Which leads us to the circus. Now, a couple of interesting things about the circus. First of all, this circus introduces us to the Flying Graysons, which, if you know anything about Batman, you know that these are Robin's parents. And at first I thought, I don't know why, but I had my blonde moment where I was like, where's Dick? Where's my Dick here? Oh no, I had to use that joke. But it makes sense that Dick is nowhere to be found because he's not even born yet. In fact, his parents aren't even together. They're fighting. They're fighting with one another because they're rivaling families. They're rivaling families in a circus that, after generations of fighting over the stupidest thing, they've been feuding, and they reconcile at the end of this episode in a rather quick manner that I was like, okay. But we get introduced to Dick's parents, and it makes sense that Dick's not born yet because Bruce is just a kid, and we know over the years that Bruce has always been about maybe 15, almost 20 years older than Robin. Robin was always a young 20-year-old something, and Bruce was already in his late 30s, almost 40s. So it makes sense that Dick is not even born yet, so there's no consideration for what direction they're going to take with the character unless they do some kind of time jump in season 2, which honestly I hope they do. Alright, that would be the only way to keep things fresh and make me want to continue watching Gotham into season 2, is to make a little time jump where Gordon becomes a little bit more mature. Maybe he gets the glasses. Bruce is played by an older actor, an actor that would make all this stuff about detective work and meeting with the members of the board much more sense. And again, it was kind of neat to see the Graysons in this episode. Again, I thought it was a little silly that not only were they fighting over the stupidest thing about a horse or whatever, but then they reconciled oh so quickly just because they found out who the killer was. I'm like, okay. And then things got even sillier where Gordon lets out a snake and it leads them to the body, which, okay, sure, they got good sense of smell, but you know, a python is not a greyhound or bloodhound or whatever the hell. It's no. And then it gets even sillier when a blind fortune teller, hence the title of the episode, comes in to give them this clue to figure out the case, played by Mark Margolis. And if you guys don't recognize him, he is Hector Salamanca, the guy with the bell from Breaking Bad. That's him. And that was incredibly stupid of him to come in and say, hey, go look that way. Which, I mean, if you are the one who's trying to cover somebody up, just don't go to the police. Don't go to the police. Don't do anything. Don't go over there and be like, hey, you should look that way. No, it's going to make it look more suspicious. What the hell are you doing? And then that leads to the big thing that everyone's going to be talking about, and I'm going to talk about now, here, right now. And that is to the actual culprit behind the murder of this snake dancer at the circus. And that is Jerome, who is the son of said woman. And many people, including the show itself, are alluding to being the Joker. Here's the deal. So obviously they're being very, very vague about whether or not this really is the Joker. They're not confirming. They're hinting at it, saying that the next villain is no joke, and then they cut to this face right here. And obviously within this scene, he cracks down maniacally. He switches his mood. He's obviously taking inspiration from both Nicholson and Ledger in terms of his performance, which honestly I think he blended rather well. The kid, this guy Cameron something, I can't remember his last name, but the actor they got to portray Jerome, which we're calling him that for now, he did a really great job. In fact, I kept watching this scene over and over. This is the first time in the entire show of Gotham where I actually went back to a scene and rewatched it. I never done that in the entire show. I never saw a scene that I went, wow, I want to watch that again. Except for this one. Because his mannerisms, his look, his smile, his eyes, everything was perfect. For the most part, it was mostly Nicholson, because you know how Nicholson, when he did his Joker, his eyes were always like half closed. It was always like, if you gotta go out, go with a smile. You know, he was kind of doing that thing. He was emulating Nicholson, but with a few hints at Ledger where he kind of gets that angry bout where he's just like that, you know, he's kind of like growling like a dog. He took that a little bit from Ledger, but overall I think it was a nice blend of those two portrayals of the Joker into something that I'm not going to say I've never seen before, because I have, but I liked his portrayal of the Joker very well. At least I'm assuming it's going to be the Joker. But again, the people behind the show, they're being very cautious. Apparently rumors has it that the Red Hood is going to appear later on in this season. So therefore an awful lot of people are like, okay, if the Red Hood's going to appear later on in the show, then who is this kid? Because how can he be the Joker? And people are getting upset because they're destroying or they're tampering, I should say, with the origins of the Joker, and they're doing their own creative thing with it, which they stated that from the get-go. I mean, Bruce and Selina kind of had a thing going on early in the season, and of course that wasn't anywhere in the comics, and Selina wasn't there present during the murder of the Waynes, and that wasn't in the comics as well. And people need to accept the fact that the people writing the show and are behind the show, the showrunners, they're doing their own thing. They're not following the comics. They're not following anything. They're doing their own thing. So whatever happens in the show is not necessarily canon from the comics and could go either way. So can this be the Joker? Yeah, it could possibly be the Joker. But it could just as well not be the Joker, and maybe he is one of the Joker's followers, and he might be induced with some kind of laugh toxin or laugh gas, and that caused him to go all crazy, and then later on we find out he's got some kind of leader, and that leader is the Red Hood that the show's alluding to, and maybe that Red Hood will transform into the Joker. An awful lot of people were speculating that some of the villains that we got introduced to may become the Joker. In fact, some people were theorizing that the Penguin was going to be the Joker at one point, and people were like, and to be honest, I thought that was a little bit bizarre. What would have made much more sense was that comedian in the first couple of episodes that was entertaining Fish Mooney, that was really glad to have gotten a laugh out of her. That would have been a much more interesting angle, but it looks like they're going with this guy because the allusion to him being the Joker from all the promo material is just a little too heavy for him to not be the Joker. But if he's not, then hey, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next. And by that I mean what they're going to do next with this character, because I'll be just actually pretty pissed if he actually gets locked away after this episode and we don't see him again. Alright, the showrunners were saying, oh, later in the season we're going to see the development of the Joker. Okay, develop. Because to introduce the character and then put him away, that's not development. And if you do that, honestly, I'm going to start taking the first steps in my process to giving up on the show. Because the rest of the stuff in this episode, was okay, much like last week's, but again, kind of unfocused, jumping back and forth, and therefore diluting some of the things that were going on. But I'll admit that the editing was a little bit tighter this time around, to where I was able to focus just a tad bit more. I wasn't zoning out as much as I was in last week's episode, and bringing in this character who, I'll admit, stole a couple of the scenes he was in, especially the earlier one where Gordon is simply just talking to him and he's talking about how sex is a healthy practice. That was creepy, yet subtle enough for me to really appreciate this actor's performance if he is indeed going to be playing the Joker. And considering that, I feel like he saved the episode from being just an okay episode like last week's. So for that, I give The Blind Fortune Teller a high 7 out of 10. So now, I want to hear from you. I definitely want to hear from you guys, your guys' opinion on this week's episode. Not just on all the other stuff that happened, but also into the introduction of what we are believing to be the Joker. Do you guys think it's a little too early? I personally think that it is a little bit too early to introduce the Joker, but if they do put him away, then make him a very essential part of Season 2, because I was hoping for him to be introduced in Season 2 and be kept around long enough for Season 2 to have his own story arc going on for that entire season, and hopefully they can still do that. But for now, what do you guys think of the portrayal of the character, the origin of the character, and the performance by this actor? And do you think that there's any possibility that Barbara may be his first victim? Dear God, I hope so. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Ugh.